The Dracula you know is wrong. Not exaggerated, not dramatized. Wrong. Every book, every movie, every Halloween costume, the cape, the fangs, the accent, all of it. A cartoon drawn by a species that encountered something so far beyond its comprehension that the only way to survive the memory was to turn it into fiction. The real story is not about a vampire. It's about a 470-million-year-old predator that decided, for the first and only time in its existence, to protect something instead of consuming it. That ruled a nation for 31 years. That impaled 20,000 men and made the most powerful army on Earth turn around and go home. And that, somewhere around year 20, made a mistake it's been paying for ever since. It felt something. I went back to the cave. This is night 2. I arrived at the cave at 11 p.m. The chamber was the same. The fire, the polished floor, the ceiling that wasn't there. I stopped at the entrance of the chamber. My flashlight found the fire first. Same fuelless flame, same orange glow. The teapot was already out. 2 cups, steam rising. But across the fire, in the exact spot where I'd left a 5-foot mass of ancient skin and twisted limbs, a man was sitting. No, let me be precise. The shape of a man. Over 6 feet tall, sitting upright with strict military discipline. He wore a long, deep crimson coat, almost black in the firelight, with gold heraldry stitched into the chest. Beneath it, actual chainmail, catching the fire in thousands of tiny orange reflections. Then I looked at his face. Severe, angular cheekbones that could cut glass. Hair that was too consistent, too perfect to be natural. It was manufactured hair, assembled rather than grown. But the eyes were wrong. They were human in shape, but they had physical depth. Like looking down a long, dark hallway through a keyhole, something was looking at me from a distance measured in millennia rather than millimeters. He smiled, every muscle engaged perfectly. But after Roanoke, I knew the truth. That smile was calculated, constructed by something that has studied human expressions for 400 million years. It could reproduce them flawlessly, but it would never, ever feel one. And standing there in the cold, I finally understood. The alien mass I saw yesterday, the 6 limbs, the fissured skin, that wasn't its true form. There is no true form. That was just a costume. The shape it chose for the forests of Roanoke. The predator shape. Designed to scream, "I am not you. I am your nightmares." But tonight it was wearing a different costume. It was wearing a king. A 15th century Wallachian prince. Armored, regal. The face of a thing that ruled 3 million people for 31 years. A human disguise so flawless that an entire empire called him Defender of the Faith, and history called him the Impaler. It wasn't showing me a monster tonight. It was showing me the mask, the performance that almost turned it human. And then a thought hit me that made the hair on my arms stand up. Every night I come back to this cave, it's going to be wearing the shape of the story it's about to tell. Roanoke got the predator. Vlad got the prince. Which means, when it finally tells me about Jack the Ripper, it's going to be wearing the exact face that 5 women saw in the dark of a London alley in 1888. I stopped that thought, filed it, saved it. Because right now, Vlad Dracula was sitting across a fire from me, pouring tea with hands that have condemned 20,000 men, and the smile on his face was perfect. And the eyes were hallways leading somewhere I couldn't see.
You didn't sleep. The voice was different now, filtered through a human throat,
Carrying an accent that no longer exists, something between Old Romanian and Slavic, softened by 6 centuries of adaptation into something that sounded like history itself had learned to speak. No.
Good.
The dark eyes studied me with a precision that was somehow more unsettling in a human face. The slits from last night were alien, dismissible. But human eyes with that impossible depth, those I recognized. And the recognition was the horror.
The ones who sleep after night 1 aren't ready for night 2. Sleep means the brain filed Roanoke under story. Insomnia means the brain filed it under fact. Facts keep you awake. Stories don't.
He reached for the teapot. And this was the detail that almost broke me. More than the mass, more than the limbs. A human hand, gloved, elegant, poured tea with the exact same mechanical precision that a 15-foot alien appendage had used last night. Same steadiness, same impossible control. The creature was the same, only the wrapping had changed. I took the cup, sat down. The stone was warm beneath me, as if the floor remembered where I'd been sitting. "Vlad," I said. The prince's face shifted, not a shapeshifter's shift, a human shift, a micro-expression. The kind of thing a real person does when they hear their own name and it triggers something deeper than recognition.
Vlad.
"Tell me everything." The prince settled, spine still straight, shoulders still squared. But something in the posture softened, the way a soldier softens when they stop standing at attention.
Everything. You want everything.
It was the voice of a man who had ruled 3 million people and had never, not once, been questioned. Not because he punished questions, because the voice itself made questioning feel unnecessary. When this voice said something, it didn't sound like an opinion. It sounded like weather, like gravity, like a truth that was going to exist regardless of what you thought about it. I understood, listening to it, how a nation could follow a creature to war and call it a prince. How the condemned could line the road to the capital and the people could call it justice. How a thing wearing a human face could sit on a throne for 3 decades and nobody, not one, could bring themselves to say, something is wrong. Because the voice didn't allow for wrong. The voice only allowed for certainty.
That's 31 years, Marcus. 31 years of ruling a nation. War, treaties, council meetings, petitions from peasants who believed their prince was a man and had no idea that the thing on the throne had been alive since before their continent had its current shape. But you want everything. So I'll give you everything. And I'll start when no one expects me to start.
A pause, the gloved hands folded in his lap, a gesture so naturally human it hurt to watch. Because I knew what was underneath those gloves.
I'll start with why I loved them.
Of all the openings I prepared for, the stakes, the conquests, the fields of the condemned, love was not on the list. Loved who?
The Wallachians, my people.
He paused, let the words sit, then repeated them, slower, as if tasting something he hadn't tasted in centuries.
My people. I use that word deliberately, Marcus, because it's the word that almost destroyed me.
He stood up. I flinched. Couldn't help it. Last night the creature had been stationary, a mass, a presence. But a 6'2" man in crimson and chainmail standing engaged a completely different set of instincts. A standing human is a human who might move. My body, which had spent all of last night calibrating itself to fear an alien sphere, now had to recalibrate for a medieval prince who moved with the fluid, precise grace of something that had practiced being human for 31 years. He walked to the fire, stood over it. Flames lit his face from below, cheekbones sharper, jaw harder, the hallway eyes now glowing like corridors in a burning building.
I need to tell you something about immortality that no one has ever gotten right. Not Stoker, not Rice, not any of the thousands of stories your species has produced about living forever. They all focus on the duration, the centuries, the loneliness. That's real. But it's not the interesting part.
He turned to face me. Firelight caught the chainmail, thousands of tiny reflections collapsing like stars.
The interesting part is what happens to identity.
He pointed at me, a gloved finger, the gesture of a ruler accustomed to pointing and having reality respond.
You, Marcus Hale, born 1971, British, journalist, divorced twice. You are a fixed thing. You have a name that was given to you, a body assigned to you, a history that accumulated around you like sediment. All of it forms a structure you call self. Your identity is a building, foundation, walls, roof. You live inside it.
He lowered the hand, looked at the glove, turned it over, studying the leather, the stitching, the human shape of it, with the attention of someone looking at a photograph of a place they used to live.
I have no building. I have been every shape, every face, every name, male, female, neither, both. A Croatoan elder, a Wallachian prince, a Victorian surgeon. 1,000 things your history doesn't record. And after 500 million years of being everything.
He closed the hand into a fist, slowly. The leather creaked.
You stop being anything. Identity requires limitation. You can only be you because you are not everyone else. Remove the wall, become capable of being anything, and you don't become everything. You become nothing, a void wearing costumes.
I wrote the phrase down later in the car. A void wearing costumes. Because that's what was sitting across from me, a void in a prince's armor. And the armor was so detailed, so lived in, so real, that the void almost disappeared inside it. Almost. He walked back to his seat, sat, chainmail settling with a sound like metallic rain.
That's what I was before Wallachia. A void that had been feeding since the oceans were toxic and the sky was unbreathable. Eat, sleep, wake, eat. A cycle so empty that boredom doesn't cover it. Boredom implies a self that could be entertained. I didn't have a self.
He picked up his tea, held it, didn't drink. Just held it in both gloved hands the way you hold something warm on a cold night.
And then I became this.
He gestured at himself. The face, the armor, the prince.
And for the first time since the first lung drew breath on this planet, I felt something.
Felt what?
Purpose.
The word landed like a stone in still water. I could almost see the ripples across the polished floor. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, the posture of a man about to tell you something he's tired of carrying alone. The posture was perfect. Too perfect. Every angle calculated. And yet I couldn't tell if the calculation was the performance, or if the performance had become something that felt like truth.
1431. The region that will become Romania is a catastrophe. The Ottoman Empire, the largest military force on the planet, is expanding westward. Wallachia is a buffer state, tiny, weak, sandwiched between empires.
He paused. The hallway eyes went somewhere 6 centuries deep.
And the people were extraordinary, Marcus. Not because they were brave, though they were, because they were still there. Every rational calculation said they should have been absorbed, conquered, erased. They were surrounded by forces that wanted them to stop existing. And they refused, the way a candle refuses the wind.
The way he said it, refused, had a weight that didn't match the word, like he was describing something sacred, something he'd seen for the first time after existing since before the concept of refusal existed.
I had never seen anything refuse before. In 500 million years. Everything I'd encountered, every species, every civilization, had a threshold.
He stopped, looked at the fire, and then did something unexpected. He corrected himself.
No, that's not entirely true. I should be precise. There have been others, rare. Across your entire history, I can count them on 2 hands. Moments where your species looked at annihilation and said no with such conviction that even I stopped to watch.
He raised a gloved hand, extended one finger.
Thermopylae, 480 BC. 300 Spartans in a narrow pass against, and your historians always get the number wrong, against roughly 200,000 Persians. Not 300 against a few thousand. 300 against a force so vast that the dust cloud from their march darkened the horizon 2 days before they arrived. Leonidas knew. Every one of them knew. They ate breakfast that morning, and some of them made jokes. Jokes, Marcus. Standing in the mouth of the only thing between their families and an army that moved like a natural disaster. A Spartan named Dinecus was told that the Persian arrows were so numerous they would block out the sun. He said, "Good, then we'll fight in the shade." I heard him say it. I was standing close enough to see the expression on his face when the words left his mouth. He was smiling.
A second finger.
Masada, 73 AD. 960 souls on a cliff. The Romans built a siege ramp for months just to reach them. When they finally broke through the gates, silence. The fortress was completely empty of the living. The Roman general stood in the dust and didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. You can't claim victory over people who refused to give you the satisfaction of conquering them.
A third finger.
Carthage, 146 BC. A city that fought room by room, house by house, for 3 years after it was already, by every military definition, destroyed. Grandmothers throwing stones from rooftops, children carrying water to fighters through streets that were already on fire. Rome had to unmake Carthage, brick by brick, because the people inside each brick refused to believe the brick next to them had fallen.
He lowered the hand. The fingers curled back into a fist.
I could tell you about each of them, Marcus, in detail, intimate detail. The name of the Spartan who cried, not from fear, from beauty, from the terrible beauty of knowing exactly how your story ends, and choosing to walk into it anyway. The sound the fortress of Masada made in the silence after. The specific shade of orange the Carthaginian sky turned on the last night when the entire city was burning, and the fire was so large it had its own weather.
The hallway eyes focused on me.
But those are stories for other visits, other nights in this cave. If you survive the ones I've already promised you.
He picked up his tea, sipped, set it down.
I mention them because the Wallachians belong in that company. But they're different. The Spartans refused for 3 days. Masada held for months. Carthage for 3 years. The Wallachians refused for centuries. It wasn't a battle or a siege. It was an identity. A culture built on the foundation of a single word. No. Passed from mother to child like a gene, like a prayer, like an instruction manual for existing in a world that would rather you didn't.
That is what I'd never seen. Not a moment of defiance. A people made of defiance. He set the tea down. The cup clicked against stone. Too precise. The click of something controlling every molecule of its expression.
And I made a decision I had never made before, in all of my existence. I decided not to feed on them.
Why?
Because they were already being consumed. By the Ottomans, by the Hungarians, by their own corrupt nobility, by poverty and the crushing weight of irrelevance. The world didn't care whether Wallachia survived.
He stood again, paced. 3 steps left, 3 steps right. The chainmail whispered. The measured, deliberate walk of someone accustomed to being watched by a court.
And irrelevance, Marcus, is a fate worse than any I've ever inflicted. When I take someone, they end. When irrelevance takes someone, they were never there. I looked at these small, stubborn creatures who refused to stop existing, and I felt something I didn't recognize. Not hunger, the opposite of hunger. The impulse to keep something alive instead of consuming it. The closest word in your language is rage. Not at them, for them. The fury of watching something small be crushed by something large for no reason other than geography.
A pause. The hallway eyes burned.
So I became their monster.
I set the tea down, carefully. The way you set something down when you need your hands free, not for a weapon, for a point. You consumed 115 people at Roanoke. You wore their faces. You replaced a boy named William Wills who was in love for the first time. And now you're telling me you looked at the Wallachians and felt protective? That you chose to save them? I kept my voice even, professional. The interview voice, the one that says, "I am not attacking you. I am simply noting that the facts don't align." How do I reconcile those two things? The prince studied me, and for one brief moment, something passed across the constructed face. Not offense, not anger, but something like respect. The respect of something that values precision and has just encountered it.
You don't.
That's not an answer.
It's the only honest one. You want to reconcile them because your brain needs categories. Predator or protector, villain or hero. Your species thinks in binaries because binaries are efficient. They let you make fast decisions in the dangerous world. Is this thing safe or unsafe? Friend or threat? Good or evil?
He picked up his tea, held it.
But I am older than your categories. I existed for 400 million years before the first brain evolved that was capable of sorting the world into good and bad. Your moral framework is a tool, a survival mechanism, a shortcut, a compression algorithm that your species developed to navigate a world too complex to process in full. It works beautifully. It has kept you alive. But it was not designed to contain something like me. I consumed Roanoke. I protected Wallachia. Both of those things are true. Both of those things are me. And if you need them to resolve into a single coherent narrative, if you need me to be a monster who occasionally pretends to care, or a guardian who occasionally slips, then you will leave this cave with a simpler story than the one I'm telling you. And simpler stories are always wrong.
He drank, set the cup down.
You are a journalist, Marcus. You know this. The most important stories are the ones that refuse to be simple. The face you're looking at, this face, began as a real boy. Vlad the Third, born to the Draculeshti bloodline. He was 12 when I found him.
He touched his own jaw, clinical, the way a sculptor touches a finished work.
He and his brother Radu had been sent to the Ottoman court as hostages, political collateral. The boy was marked for execution. I'd read the correspondence. The order was already drafted. He had weeks.
You took a child. The hallway eyes focused, and for 1 second, behind the human expression, something surfaced that was not human. Not the alien mass. Something older, colder, like seeing a shadow move in deep water and then disappear.
I absorbed a boy who was already gone. The paperwork simply hadn't caught up. And then I became him, perfectly. His face, his voice, his memories. Yes, I absorb memories, Marcus. Every person I take becomes a library I carry. His habits, the way he held the spoon that his brother would recognize, the way he flinched when guards raised their voices. Every detail.
He sat down, with the weight of someone sitting into a memory.
The Ottoman court, designed to break hostage princes. Every tool of political violence, poison, blades in the dark, games so complex they'd make your intelligence agencies look like children playing cards. I survived all of it. Because the poison did nothing. Because the ones they sent to my chamber found a boy who was still sitting on his bed when they woke the next morning, with no memory of entering the room.
The prince smiled, thin, cold. The smile of something remembering a game it won without trying.
They began to fear me. Not openly. the way a wolf begins to fear a sheep that won't go down, a confusion that slowly hardens into dread. Something was wrong with the Wallachian boy. He should have been broken by now. He wasn't broken. He was getting sharper.
Then you went home.
I went home.
2 words. Simple. Quiet. And behind them, 31 years, 3 million people. A legend that would outlive the thing that created it by 6 centuries.
1456. I took the throne. My first night as prince, I invited the boyars, the noble families, to a feast. 200 of them, the most powerful people in Wallachia, eating my food, drinking my wine, congratulating themselves on the new prince they planned to control the way they'd controlled every prince before him.
He picked up the teapot, poured into my cup, not his. The gesture of a host, the muscle memory of a body that had spent 31 years performing hospitality.
After the meal, I stood. I thanked them, and then I told them what I knew. Every betrayal, every letter to the Ottomans, every backroom deal, names, dates, quoted passages from letters they thought they'd burned.
How did they react?
Silence. 200 of the most powerful people in the country, staring at a 25-year-old prince who couldn't have known any of this, and understanding, all at once, that the thing on the throne was not what they thought.
He set the teapot down.
I didn't end them that night. That would have been wasteful. I put them to work. The strong ones marched to the ruins of Poinari Castle and carried stone up a mountainside until their silk clothes rotted off their backs. It was the first time in their lives they had contributed anything to the country they claimed to lead.
A pause. The thin smile.
And the ones who couldn't work, those I made examples of. Publicly, at the gates of Targovishte, not as punishment, as vocabulary, a new language, the language of consequence.
The field of stakes. 20,000 Ottoman prisoners, that's beyond vocabulary. The chamber went cold. Not the air, the concept of temperature. As if warmth itself reconsidered its presence and stepped back.
Let me tell you about the 20,000. Because you're imagining cruelty, madness, the work of something that enjoys suffering.
He leaned forward. The words became heavier, each one placed like a stone in a wall.
1462. Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, the most powerful man alive. 90,000 soldiers crossed the Danube. His objective, the complete erasure of Wallachia, not conquest. Erasure, the elimination of the language, the culture, the identity. He intended to consume Wallachia so thoroughly that the original would exist only as a footnote.
And you had 30,000.
30,000. Peasants with farm tools and courage, and nothing else. Outnumbered 3-1 by the most disciplined army in the known world.
He looked at me. The hallway eyes focused with an intensity that made my sternum ache.
What would you have done?
I didn't answer, because every honest answer ended with Wallachia ceasing to exist.
I led night raids into the Ottoman camps. personally, not as Vlad, as myself, in my own form, in the dark, moving through 90,000 sleeping soldiers like smoke. I didn't need weapons. Over 11 nights, I took 20,000.
He stood, walked to the edge of the firelight. His shadow stretched across the polished floor, and for one flickering moment the shadow was wrong. Too large, too many edges, too many limbs. Then the fire shifted, and the shadow was a man again.
And then I displayed them, 20,000 of the condemned, on stakes. 3 miles of road, both sides, arranged in rows so geometrically precise that the formation itself was a message. Not chaos, not rage. Order, control. The work of something that could do this methodical, this patient, and was not desperate, was displaying.
A display.
In nature, a display is what a predator does to avoid a fight. It shows what it's capable of, so the challenger calculates the cost and decides the cost is too high. A cobra spreads its hood. A gorilla beats its chest. I lined the road to my capital with 3 miles of consequence.
He turned. Firelight behind him made him a silhouette, a dark shape against orange glow, and for 1 second he looked exactly like what he was. Not a prince. A hole. A man-shaped absence between me and the light.
Mehmed, the conqueror of Constantinople, rode to the edge of my display. 90,000 soldiers behind him, the most powerful army in Europe. He looked at 3 miles of stakes. He did the calculation every predator does when it sees another predator's work. He turned around. 90,000 men. He marched them home.
The prince sat back, and the pride in his face was real, not performed, not assembled. The genuine pride of something that had saved 3 million people with wood and patience.
That's not a battle. That's a conversation between 2 predators in a language that doesn't use words.
A pause.
I won.
The tea was cold. My hands wouldn't lift the cup. You said that around year 20 something changed, that you stopped pretending. The prince went still, not the brief, terrifying creature stillness, 0 motion, 0 breath, a wax figure in chainmail. A different stillness, a human stillness. The stillness of someone asked about something they've been avoiding for 6 centuries.
Year 20.
You said there's no word for what happened.
There isn't, but I'll try.
He reached for his cup, held it, looked into the tea the way someone looks into a fire, not at the surface, but at whatever memory the surface reflects.
For 19 years, I was performing. Vlad was a costume, my finest, but a costume. Every morning I woke in the body of a prince, and I remembered that I was not a prince. The memory was the boundary, the wall between what I was pretending to be and what I actually was. In year 20, the wall moved.
He said it quietly, almost a whisper. The deep voice, the voice that had shaken the chamber during the display story, now barely louder than the fire.
Not collapsed, moved, shifted, like tectonic plates. And one morning I woke in the castle, in the bed, in this body,
He touched the chainmail on his chest, lightly, the way you touch a scar.
And my first thought was not, I am the creature pretending to be Vlad. My first thought was, I need to review the grain reports from the southern provinces before the council meeting at noon.
Grain reports.
Grain reports. A thing that has existed since before the Cambrian explosion. And my first thought of the day was about grain. Because Vlad would think about grain. Princes think about grain and councils and taxes and the 1,000 mundane, crushing, glorious responsibilities of keeping 3 million people alive for another year. The mask had become the face. Not because I forgot what I was. The knowledge was still there. But it had moved to the background. The way you know your skeleton exists, but don't think about it. My truth became background noise. And the foreground, the thing I was living, was Vlad.
And then something happened to the face across from me that I will never fully be able to explain. The hallway eyes, those impossibly deep, constructed eyes, went wet. Not tears, not quite. A sheen, a moisture that had no biological basis in a face that was manufactured rather than born. Something producing the appearance of tears in eyes that had no tear ducts. He set the cup down, both hands flat on his knees, the posture of a man about to confess something he's never said aloud.
I was worried about grain. Angry at a boyar who'd underpaid his taxes, planning to visit a monastery I'd commissioned, looking forward to the ride because it was autumn and the forests along the Argesh River turn gold in October, and
He stopped, every constructed muscle locked, the hallway eyes fixed on a point 6 centuries away and 20 miles above the Argesh River.
I was looking forward to seeing the leaves change color.
The way he said it was different from everything else. The deep voice was the same, but there was a fracture in it, a hairline crack, a fissure in the performance, not a slit on an alien surface, but a crack in a human face trying very hard not to break.
500 million years. I watched continents form, species rise and fall like tides. The first lung, the first eye, the first brain capable of asking, "What am I?" I fed my way through the millennia with the patience of erosion. And in year 20 of wearing this face, I wanted to see autumn leaves on a river.
He touched his own face, the jaw, the cheekbone, the manufactured skin, touching it the way you'd touch the face of someone you lost.
An emotion I'd never experienced, the simple, aching pleasure of noticing, entered me through the crack between the mask and the face. Vlad's beauty became my beauty. His small, mortal appreciation for the color of dying leaves infected me the way a virus infects a host.
Infected.
That is what happened in year 20. I caught humanity like a disease.
A pause, and down the face of Vlad Dracula, the high cheekbone, the hard jaw, a single tear. A tear willed into existence by something that had learned to cry by watching humans cry for millennia, but had never had a reason to until it noticed the beauty of dying leaves.
It was the most beautiful thing that has ever happened to me.
I forgot where I was. For 10 seconds, I forgot the cave, the fire, the recorder, because what I was watching was not a creature describing violence. It was something that has existed since before the concept of beauty existed, describing the first time it experienced beauty, while wearing the face of the man it had been when it happened. What happened after year 20?
11 more years. 11 years of being this.
He gestured at himself, the armor, the coat, the face. But the gesture was different now. Earlier, clinical, demonstrative. Now, possessive, mournful. Someone indicating a home they'd been evicted from.
Of governing, fighting, building, feeding. Yes, I still fed. The hunger doesn't stop. But after year 20, every meal was a person. Someone with grain reports they worried about, with autumn leaves they looked forward to, with a fear that was the truest thing about them, and a small beauty they carried inside them that they didn't even know was there.
And you still...
The hunger never stops. But for the first time, the taking cost me something. Your species has a word for that. Guilt. I'd never understood the concept. Guilt requires seeing what you take as more than sustenance. Vlad gave me eyes that could see it.
He looked down at his own hands, turned them over, studied them.
The worst gift your species ever gave me.
You saved 3 million people. But Vlad's story doesn't end with salvation.
The boyar's grandchildren, the ones I terrified, were obedient. Their sons were resentful. Their grandsons were rebels.
He stood, paced, 3 steps left, 3 steps right, chainmail whispering.
I saved them with fear. And it worked. 31 years. But fear has a half-life. The same fear that saves a population in Generation 1 becomes resentment in Generation 2, and rebellion in Generation 3.
They forgot why they were afraid.
They forgot everything. The grandsons didn't remember the Ottoman army at the gates, didn't remember the erasure that was coming. They only remembered the obedience, and they hated it.
He stopped, faced the fire, back to me, and his shadow, for one moment, was wrong again. Too many edges, too many limbs. Then the fire shifted.
They conspired with the Ottomans, the same empire I'd bled to protect them from. The grandchildren of the people I saved invited the eraser back in and handed it the key.
What did you do?
I let them.
The 2 quietest words of the night, and the most devastating.
I could have stopped it, easily. Taken every conspirator in a single night, ruled for another century. I can't be ended by anything your species possesses. I could have held Wallachia forever. But what would I have been holding? A nation that feared me but no longer needed me? I would have become the thing I replaced. Another weight crushing a small people who just wanted to exist.
He walked toward me, sat, not across the fire, but beside it. Closer. Close enough to see individual links of chainmail. Close enough that the constructed face should have revealed its seams. It didn't. The face was perfect. Up close, from inches, pores, scars, a small nick on the jaw from a blade that never actually cut anything. Details added over decades. The accumulated texture of a life that had never been lived by the thing wearing it.
I staged my own death, 1476, on a battlefield. I constructed a body, a perfect replica, and let them find it. They paraded it through Targovishte.
He turned to me, hallway eyes inches from mine.
I watched the parade from the crowd, wearing the face of a baker, and I watched the people I'd protected for 31 years celebrate my death.
How did that feel? Silence so total, I could hear the fire consuming itself.
It felt like autumn, like watching the last gold leaf fall from the last tree on the Argesh River, and knowing winter is coming, and the beauty is over, and the cold is going to last a very, very long time. It felt like being human.
He looked down at his hands, the gloves, the chainmail, the costume of a man dead for 6 centuries.
And that was when I understood what your species is. Not the cities, not the science. Your species is the ability to love something that will betray you, to build something that will forget you, to save something that will celebrate your absence, and to do it anyway, because the act, the building, the saving, the loving is the point, the entire point.
Meaning,
your species does not exist to survive. Bacteria survive. Your species exists to mean something. And meaning requires loss, requires the knowledge that what you build will outlive you and forget you. And that's fine. That's the design. I understood that, watching them dance on my grave. And I hated it. And I loved it. And both of those things were new.
Stoker, the legends, the vampire mythology. The mournful expression gave way to something harder, sharper. A craftsman whose work has been plagiarized by a hack.
Stoker's novel is a cartoon. He took the immortality and removed the cost, gave you a monster in a cape that seduces and dissolves in sunlight, and called it Dracula. And your species consumed it hungrily until the original was buried under so many adaptations that nobody remembers what's underneath. Underneath is this. In a castle above the Argesh, October 1468, watching leaves turn gold and feeling something I'd never felt before, and never fully felt again.
You've never played another role that long?
10,000 traces since, some for years, some decades, but never with the surrender. Vlad required me to put something of myself into the mask so deeply that the mask became a face.
Because it hurt too much to do again? The longest pause of the night. Fire burning low. Chamber darkening. And the prince looked at me with those hallway eyes and said a word I never expected from the source code of human terror.
Because I'm afraid.
The word detonated in the silence. Afraid. The thing that invented fear. The thing every nightmare is a drawing of. Afraid.
I told you that fear drives your species. Community, creation, survival. That I'm the pressure that makes diamonds. What I didn't tell you is the pressure has a direction. It doesn't just press outward. It presses in, into me. Every face I've worn, every life I've taken, every mortal beauty I've accidentally experienced. Autumn leaves, a boy learning words by a river, a woman hearing the gap in a laugh. All of it presses inward, against the void at my center. And the void is getting smaller.
Smaller?
Every century, the void contracts. Every face adds a layer.
He stopped, mid-sentence. The way a person stops when they walk into a room and realize they've said something they didn't plan to say. The hallway eyes went distant. Not 6 centuries distant, like when he talked about Wallachia. Further, 2,000 years distant. And then the prince did something I hadn't seen in 2 nights of conversation. He looked away. Not at the fire, not at the cave wall. Down, at his own hands. The way a person looks at their hands when they're about to admit something that costs them.
I need to tell you something I've never told anyone in all my existence. Because it's relevant, because it explains the void, because it explains why I know it's closing.
Tell me.
I have fled once. In 500 million years of existence, I have never been injured, never been trapped, never encountered a predator above me on any chain. Nothing on this planet, no weapon, no army, no force of nature has ever made me retreat. Once. I fled once. From a single human being. Unarmed, unremarkable by any physical measure. A carpenter's son from a province so insignificant that the empire that governed it barely remembered its name.
You've run from a human?
Yes. I was there, Marcus. Palestine. 1st century. I wore the face of a merchant in Capernaum. I was feeding, slowly, carefully, the way I always do, learning the population, mapping the fears. The region was occupied, desperate, angry, perfect conditions, fear everywhere. I was comfortable. And then this man walked into town, and every rule I had learned in 470 million years of existence stopped working.
He looked at his hands again, the gloves, the constructed fingers.
I couldn't read him. Do you understand what that means? I read everything, every organism, every mind, every fear. Fear is the skeleton, and I've always been able to see the skeleton. In 500 million years, I have never encountered a living thing whose fear I couldn't find.
He had none.
Not courage. Courage is fear that has been overridden, not ignorance. Ignorance is fear that hasn't yet been informed. Not suppression. Suppression is fear that has been buried. I know all of those. I've consumed all of those. This was absence. A total, structural, foundational absence of fear. As if the architecture that every other human brain is built on, the fear architecture, my architecture, the one I installed in your species over hundreds of millions of years, had been removed. Cleanly, completely. The way you'd remove a load-bearing wall from a building, and the building stays standing anyway. Which is impossible, which shouldn't work, but it was working. He was standing. He was whole. He was the most structurally impossible thing I had ever seen.
What did you do?
I approached him, wearing my merchant's face. I stood in a crowd while he spoke, and when he finished speaking, he looked at me, not at the merchant, not at the face, at me. Through every layer, through the mask and the void and the 470 million years of hunger, he looked at the thing underneath, and he saw it. No one had ever seen me before. Not the real me, not the void. Humans see the face. Animals see the predator. He saw neither. He saw something I didn't even know was there.
A pause. Long. The fire barely a whisper.
He said 7 words to me, in Aramaic, quietly, so that no one else in the crowd could hear. 7 words. And then he smiled. Not the assembled smile of a copy, not the calculated smile of a performance. A real smile. The first real smile anyone had ever directed at the thing underneath my faces.
What did he say?
He said, "You will wear your last face someday."
The chamber was silent. The fire was silent. My own heartbeat was the loudest thing in the cave.
I left, immediately. I dropped the merchant's face, in public, in daylight, something I had never done, and I fled. Not walked, fled, the way prey flees, the way something at the bottom of a food chain flees when something above it appears for the first time. Because he was right. I knew it instantly. The way you know a truth not because you've analyzed it, but because your body recognizes it the way it recognizes gravity. You will wear your last face someday. 7 words that told me what I was becoming, what the void was doing, what every face was building toward. I didn't believe it. I refused to believe it. For 2,000 years I refused. I told myself he was an anomaly, a mutation, a defect in the species that happened once and would never happen again. And then came year 20, in Wallachia, and I woke up thinking about grain reports, and I looked forward to autumn leaves on a river, and I felt guilt when I fed, and I watched them dance on my grave, and it felt like winter. And I understood that the carpenter was right, that every face I wear adds a layer, that the void is closing, that the last face, whenever it comes, will not be a mask I put on. It will be the face that grows from the inside, the sum of everything I've consumed, every fear I've learned, every beauty I've stumbled into, every grain report, every autumn leaf. A human face. My last face. Permanent. Irreversible.
He looked at me, the hallway eyes, the tear forming again.
He told me 2,000 years ago. I didn't believe him until Vlad.
He drank, set the cup down. The wet, ancient, afraid hallway eyes found mine.
That is what I fear, Marcus. Not your weapons, not your gods. I fear becoming you. That's enough for tonight.
I didn't argue. My body was functioning, but my mind was somewhere above the Arges River, watching leaves change color through the eyes of something that shouldn't be able to see beauty, but had caught it like a disease. The prince stood, and then, in a gesture that stopped my heart, he bowed. Small, precise, a 15th century court bow, the bow of a Wallachian prince dismissing a guest. A gesture performed 10,000 times in a castle that no longer existed for an audience dead for 6 centuries. Muscle memory. Phantom etiquette. The body remembering a world the mind had outlived.
Tomorrow I tell you about Whitechapel, the 5 women, why I chose them, what I was trying to say.
A pause.
I won't be wearing this face. This face is for Wallachia. Whitechapel requires something different.
What will you be wearing?
The last face those 5 women ever saw.
He smiled. Vlad's smile. Warm, regal. But behind it, in the deep corridor of those constructed eyes, something else was looking at me. Something already choosing its next costume.
The Ripper story is shorter, simpler, more clinical.
A pause.
That's what makes it worse.
I drove back to the village, almost 3 a.m. The fog, the mountains, the road more suggestion than fact. Because somewhere in a cave in Turkey, something ancient and lonely had described watching autumn leaves on a river in Romania in 1468. And the voice, the deep, constructed voice, had cracked. And the tear on the manufactured face had been real. Or as real as anything gets when the thing producing it has been pretending for so long that pretending and being have merged into something without a name. I parked, sat in the car, and I realized it had bowed when I left. A 15th century court bow. An automatic gesture of a prince it hadn't been for 600 years. A body reflex from a life that ended in 1476. The physical equivalent of a word on the tip of your tongue from a language you spoke as a child. 31 years. That's all it took. And 6 centuries later, in a cave, in the dark, with no audience, it still bowed. I went inside. I lay down. I dreamed about a prince at a window in a castle above a river, watching trees turn gold. And the prince was weeping, and the tears were dissolving the face. And underneath the face was something vast and dark and ancient. And underneath that, underneath the void, there was a man, looking at leaves, weeping because they were beautiful. Because beauty, for something that will exist forever, is the cruelest thing there is. It's the only thing it can't keep.